background on how this discussion came about, this idea of doing this this PENTalk, and it came from I was having a conversation with an advisor that I'm friends with and I've known for 5 or 6 years, and does business with Pentegra, has a very successful retirement plan practice. I'm friends with him, and we were having a phone conversation, and he said a couple of things that they stuck with me. Well, one thing he said was, I really don't like meeting with wholesalers, which, as a wholesaler, you hear that and you think, okay. But I'm guessing that there's a lot of people in the audience that have had that similar thought from time to time. And his point's a valid one. He said, look, if I take every meeting with every wholesaler, I never get anything done. So, yeah, that's why he doesn't love meeting with wholesalers. So I understand that. But then he said something that I thought was very interesting. He said, look, when I meet with a wholesaler, I don't want to hear the same old stuff. I don't want to hear, oh, we have Open Arc and we have a great website and we got 50 cups from Plan Sponsor. Those are all wonderful things and you should be proud of it. But what I want to know is, how are you going to make my practice better? How are you going to make my practice better? That's what I want to know. What idea are you going to give me? What are you going to teach me? What differentiator are you going to bring to my attention that's going to elevate my practice, make me better at what I do? That's what I want to know. I don't need more product. I've got plenty of product. Help me make my practice better. And that led to a great discussion about their practice and the types of things that they're doing and how they're differentiating themselves in the marketplace and how they're winning business. And that led to this PENTalk about outsourcing. So, let's see here. Oh, there we go. Okay, make sure. It's a little slow on the uptake here on my computer. So, so why do we outsource? Well, we outsource all the time. We don't even consciously think about outsourcing. We just do it. We do it in our professional and our personal lives. But if we stopped and thought about it, there's usually some factors in play as to why we outsource. And typically it has to do with things like, well, we lack the expertise. And we don't really want to gain the expertise. We don't want to take the time to gain that expertise. Maybe it's just difficult. The work is tough. We don't want to do it. Maybe it's a time issue. Maybe we just don't want to take the time to do it, or we feel like there's a better way to spend our time. And maybe it's economical. Maybe we have somebody else do it because it's just, in the long run, it ends up being less expensive. And the best example I can give for that, for me, is changing the oil in my car. I have 3 daughters, and they will often say, Dad, you can learn anything by watching a YouTube video. Which is Dad, maybe I have some concerns about that, but that's a different discussion. But so, yeah, let's assume that I could learn how to change the oil in my car by watching a YouTube video. You know what? I don't really want to do that. I don't have that expertise. I don't have a burning desire to gain that expertise. There's probably better things I could do with my time. And I run the risk of screwing it up. What if I don't put something back the right way, or tighten something enough, and I end up causing some real damage to my car, and it becomes it's a big ticket item. It's expensive. I can assure you my wife would not be very happy with that experiment. So it just makes sense to outsource that, right? I take it to the garage down the street. They do hundreds of oil changes. They're experts at it. I drop my car up, I go next door, I catch up on some phone calls and some work, and I come back, get my car, and I go. It makes sense. So, outsourcing is a fact of life. We do it all the time. Business owners outsource things like IT. They outsource web development. They outsource payroll, corporate tax prep. So very common for employers to do that. The question is, what about ERISA? So many things that dealing with the operation of the retirement plan, they retain, right? And that kind of doesn't make sense. ERISA is hard. Right? There's lots of things to trip up in ERISA. And really, from an employer standpoint, wouldn't it be better for them to be able to focus on the actual running their business, giving these duties to people that have expertise in it, reduce their liability, right? All those things. And in the end, it's probably cost effective for them to do it. So it just makes sense that we should spend more time thinking about taking work off that employer's plate and reducing their liability. And we can do that in a retirement plan pretty effectively. I'm going to get a little bit granular for just a moment, and because I think it's important to kind of talk about the foundations behind outsourcing. My dad used to say that if you read one book on a topic, you know more than most people. If you read 3, you're an expert. This is not going to be the equivalent of 3 books, but it should it'll at least give us a path to follow. Okay, so we all know, right? The employer decides they want to sponsor a plan, therefore they become the plan sponsor, and they're the first fiduciary, right? That plan sponsor really has one fiduciary duty, and that's to select and oversee the other fiduciaries, right? And if we want to categorize the duties and responsibilities broadly, they can be dropped into 2 different areas. They can be dropped into assets and operations. So we have plan trustees and we have plan administrators, right? Those are the named fiduciaries. ERISA says there has to be at least one named fiduciary on every plan, but most commonly we have 3. So this is the structure of a typical single employer plan. Now, ERISA gives this amazing ability for the plan sponsor to carve these duties out. The term that's used in ERISA is allocation. It's intentional. That word has specific meaning. It's different than delegate. Delegate means you're asking someone to do something on your behalf. Allocation means you're carving these duties out. You're giving them to someone else. And as long as you do it prudently, as long as you take a prudent approach to carving these duties out, then you're not responsible for them anymore. And that's, that's an amazing opportunity to carve duties out. But here's what really happens. So the plan sponsor has this ability to carve these duties out, and instead, like with the plan trustee side of things on the assets, they self-trustee the plan. So they name themselves. The business owner names themselves as the trustee, or the officer is the plan, or maybe the retirement plan committee. So in essence, they've taken that liability and moved it from one pocket to the other. They really haven't gotten rid of it. Okay. Now, our industry has done kind of a nice job of stepping into this opportunity, this unmet need. 321 advisory support for the plan sponsor, 338 discretionary support. So those are ways to outsource, to get help for the plan sponsor regarding the assets of the plan. And it's something that I think is trended quite nicely over the last decade. It's given a great opportunity for advisors to charge a fee for a service that's needed. Plan sponsor typically can't be the prudent expert in this area, so it only makes sense that they would get support for that. So the outsourcing on the asset side is something that's fairly well developed over the years. But here's the thing I would say, the liability associated with the assets of the plan is substantial, but the probability is not that high. Yeah, I know. There's, the lawsuits are out there. We read about them all the time, but majority of the time, those are in the mega plans. Yes, it is moving down market a little bit, but here's the thing: it's still low probability. Okay, and also, because this outsourcing on the asset side has become a little bit more mature, it's also meant that it's been commoditized a little bit. Your ability to charge a substantial fee for these services is it's not easy to do, right? We have all sorts of, you plug the information into a software program, it spits out an IPS, and you have all the data, and yeah, you can differentiate yourself there, but it's become much more difficult. On the other side of the equation, you have the operation of the plan administrator duties. 316A is the plan administrator duties. And the thing about allocation is if you don't actually allocate the duties to another named fiduciary, you retain them. So in 99.9999% of the time, the plan sponsor does not name a plan administrator, and therefore the plan sponsor retains those duties. Now, the reality of it is, Bill and Sue working for the employer are actually the ones that are kind of doing the work, making a lot of these decisions. They become a functional fiduciary. They're approving things. They have some discretion. They might not be aware of that, but they do. Okay. One thing, the directed trustee. I'll just be real brief on this. Directed trustee. If an employer has this and they think they're getting some substantial reduction in their liability, they're probably, well, they definitely are mistaken. I'm not saying the directed trustee isn't a real service. It is, but if you're directed, it means that you're taking direction from a named fiduciary. He or she who is it makes the decision is responsible for the consequences of the decision, and the directed trustee isn't making decisions. So not a lot of liability support there. But on the other side, for the plan administrator, if you talk to most employers, they would say, well, I have a record keeping a TPA, and they're doing these things, and they're doing these things, but they're doing them ministerial only, right? They're typically non-fiduciary. So the responsibility, the duty still falls back on the plan sponsor and people working for the plan sponsor that are acting in that functional fiduciary role. Now, here's what I would say. The opportunity here is substantial because plans are messed up. ERISA is hard. It's not easy, right? So, and you bump into plans all the time that have operational issues. So this is an area where if you want to step into it and gain some type of expertise in it, you can really make a difference. It's a wide open playing field. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to spend the majority of our time here talking about that plan administrator role and the opportunities that are in there for you. Okay, so how many times does the word administrator show up in the in a typical document, right? The typical Reliance volume submitter document. 319 times. That's a lot. That is a lot. And you know what? Every time it shows up, it means there's something that has to be done. This slide is the 50 chores. You know, there's more than 50 chores, but you know, to try to put it on one page, the font is already tiny. You'd never be able to read it. So we're going to call it the 50 chores of the plan administrator. And here's the reality: the employer does this wonderful thing. They decide to sponsor this retirement plan. They give their employees a wonderful benefit, an opportunity to have a comfortable retirement. It's a nice tool for hiring and retaining employees, and by the way, they get to save a little bit of money pre-tax, so it's all good. But in doing so, they sign their name on a 90-page legal document. And when you sign your name on a 90-page legal document, and by the way, if we're all honest with each other, they never read it. So they haven't read the document, but they've signed it. It means you got to do stuff, right? You have responsibilities. It means you got to read stuff, you got to review things, you got to approve things, you got to sign things, you got to meet deadlines, you got, there's just, you got to retain documents, you got to keep notes. There's all this stuff that goes along with it, right? And it's a lot. It's a lot of opportunity for problems. I just talked to an advisor who's working on a plan within the last week that is going to have to go through a voluntary correction. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, but because they don't have an update document. How does that happen? I mean, plan sponsors and administrators, record keepers and administrators, they get paid to amend these documents and keep them up to date. They love it. It's a part of the business. So how does that happen? Well, the employer's in the middle, and they're not good at it. So you end up with a document not being signed. New hire processing. I can remember sitting with a group probably, I don't know, 2 years ago, and I had their adoption agreement, and I was sitting with them, and they said, well, so we have a year eligibility, and I looked at the document, and I said, well, it says here you have 6 months. And I said, no. Ever since I've been here, it's always been a year. Well, it was 6 months. Oops, that's a problem. So, new hire processing, turning on when people are eligible, ACA, large plan, took their plan over, looked at the document, doing a review, so you have automatic enrollment. Yeah, but we've actually never used it. Okay, that's not good, right? Notices. I don't have a huge confidence level that notices actually get sent in the way that is expected, right? It sounds simple, send the notices, but if you actually read through, the reg, there's more to it than that. These things, distribution, hardships, documenting the hardships, making those decisions, tracking down missing participants, record retention, all this stuff, all opportunities for issues, right? All opportunities for you as the advisor to come in, ask questions, and create a great opportunity for yourself. Now let's tie those chores back to the statistics that the government provides us. Voluntary correction program was put together by the IRS because they knew that plans are screwed up, and they wanted to give people an opportunity to voluntarily correct their plan. It's kind of like confessing your sins. It's kind of like what we tell our kids. If you come to me with what you did, it'll, the punishment won't be as great as if we find out on our own. Truthfully, I'm not sure it always works out that way for our kids, but I'm not going to tell them that. But from an IRS standpoint, yeah, you voluntarily step forward and say, I got a problem and I'm fixing it. So here's the list that we have, and the number one is failure to amend the document, not having an up-to-date document. Again, crazy. Definition of compensation, using the wrong definition. That happens all the time. Not getting the right people in the plan, keeping the right people out of the plan that should be out, loan errors, You know, I've talked to conversion managers that would say there's never a plan we take over that doesn't have some issue with loans. So, you know, these are real. There's stuff that goes on inside of a plan that creates an opportunity. There's an unmet need here for that employer to get out from under these types of duties. There's something called the Delinquent Filer Voluntary Correction Program, and I think last year there were over 22,000 employers that took advantage of that. And when you don't get your 5,500 in, those penalties are substantial. Okay. Okay. So let me see. Remind me later. Okay. So bottom line is there's a lot going on with plans operationally. There's a tremendous opportunity for you. It's taking things away from the employer that honestly I think if they really understood the fact that they didn't have to do this, I don't suspect a lot of employers would raise their hand and voluntarily say, can I do all of this? They wouldn't want it to, right? They don't want to have to, you know, goof around with 5,500s and determining eligibilities and track people down and, you know, validating, verifying hardships and the receipts and all the stuff that goes along with it. If they given a choice, they probably wouldn't do that. Now, let's change gears a little bit and talk about the marketplace. So it's relatively new, this whole idea of 316 plan administrator services outsourcing. It's evolving, but it still is pretty new. I mean, I think, you know, probably first started hearing talk about it maybe 4 years ago or so. But it's become quite prevalent, right? Most of the services that are out there are what's termed 316 Lite. That's not our term. That's actually Fred Reich who coined that term, and it just means that you're not named in the document. You're providing services for the that employer, and good services, needed services, but not named in the document. And here's I think a biggie. There's no uniformity of these services. And if you start looking at contracts, it's all over the map. I mean, and so there's no way that the employer can really understand what's being done for them and what's being left on their plate. And certainly it's difficult to determine if it's being done for them, if it's being done as a fiduciary or not. So there's lots of opportunity there. And you know, this is not a secret, but obviously service providers, when they write their contracts, they write it to protect themselves. They're not writing it to protect the employer. So digging into these contracts is something that's needed. It's a service that's needed. Now, there's probably a lot of different ways that you can break this out, but I'm going to break it out into 3 different levels of outsourcing. So you have supervisory, and this is a non-working 316 fiduciary. This would be somebody that sits on top of a record keeper, a TPA. They're not actually doing the work, but they're named in the document, and that's great. So that's, you know, the employer's name is taken off the document. The supervisory 316's name is being added. They have the responsibility and liability, but it's an added layer. It tends to be a little bit more expensive for that reason because they're not actually doing the work. Sometimes there's some complications with integration, right, between the supervisory 316 and the people doing the work. And one other thing I'd point out too is that you want to look at these. I've seen situations where the supervisory 316 named the document retains the responsibility for hiring and firing service providers. It doesn't have to be that way. That's not the way that's handled in our agreements, but that I've seen it handled that way. And here's the thing: if that supervisory 316 is soliciting business through advisors and then has the responsibility from a fiduciary standpoint for hiring and firing, I would say that there's potentially a conflict there. So that's something just to keep in mind. Next level would be supplemental or additional service provider. So that's what's most common out there. That would be probably the 316 Lite piece to it. So the existing, you know, TPAs and record keepers are providing some sort of services, hands off, maybe sending out notices, annual required notices, you know, loans, maybe working with hardships and improving hardships. So some level of fiduciary support. That's become very common. It tends to be inexpensive to some degree, you know, depending. Again, it's all over the map, but it's a little bit less expensive probably than the third, which is working 316 administrator. And that's the role that PENTalk plays. So PENTalk is going to be named in the document, meaning that we take over everything. We're the named plan administrator. We leave the employer with basically 3 things. You gotta get the contributions in on time. provide us with the information we need to be able to do our job, and you need to make sure it was prudent to hire us. So that's what we leave. So when we're named in the document and take over as the working 316, we're providing all the services. There's no added layer, right? So that's good. There's no issue with integration because we're actually doing the work, and it's cost effective. Okay, so it's going to be more expensive typically than 316 Lite, which are just carving out certain services, but typically it's less expensive than the supervisory piece. So that would be, again, there are different ways that you could carve this up, but that would be one way to look at it. And I'm going to get off the PENTegra kick here. Of course, they do pay half my FICA taxes, so I do have an obligation here to promote PENTegra. But I didn't want this presentation to be just a PENTegra sales pitch. But I think it's important to note something. 7 magic words. Most contracts, as I said, are written to limit the liability for the service provider. Ours is actually the opposite. So we're saying that the responsibilities and powers, all those responsibilities and powers of ERISA Fiduciary, they're ours whether it's in the agreement or not. So that's really the opposite of what typically happens. I think that's an important thing to know. And the other thing is the fiduciary promise. I would tell you that looking at contract after contract and agreement, yes, I'm probably biased, but I've not seen anything that comes close to the PENTegra fiduciary promise. I think those are 2 important things that you'd want to take note of. Okay, so back to being an expert. So here's the thing. This is where it's a wide open field and a great opportunity for the advisor to step into. So, I don't think it's going to take a lot to become an expert, but it's going to take a little bit of work, a little bit of research, and a little bit of time. But, understanding what the different levels are, what's being provided, what the differences are, because it's important for that employer to know what the scope of it is, right? Some services are going to be provided for the employer as a fiduciary, some are not, and whatever is not being provided falls back on the lap of the employer. So it would be important to compare contracts, compare agreements, get a little bit into the nitty-gritty, and be able to provide great consultation and really match up the services that are needed to what's being delivered, because maybe the employer, their big bugaboo is just getting out notices because of the nature of their company and the complexity of it. And so if you can take that off their plate and do it cost effectively, that's wonderful, right? Maybe they don't need the full name fiduciary in the document. Maybe they need light services. So knowing what the employer needs, what they're willing to spend, and how it affects their business, those are all important things to be able to do. Now, words matter, right? So the contracts, that's where the rubber meets the road. And the brochures all look great, right? It's got 316 fiduciary services, all that stuff splattered all over the place. But you got to dig into the contracts. So, helping you comply, that should be a bit of a red flag. So helping you, what does that mean? It means you're still responsible, right? The next one, and these are all blotted out, the provider. These are all providers that are known. They're in the marketplace. They're wonderful. This is not meant to be disparaging against them, disparaging. So that's not the intent. It's just to show that the contracts are what they are. Anytime a contract includes gross negligence, go talk to an attorney about that. That's tough to that's a tough one, right? That's a big hurdle. I've seen them where there's been statute of limitations, like 12 months. That's not long, right? $1 million is a pretty decent insurance number, but again, it's limiting. Oftentimes, it'll talk about 316 and fiduciary, but then when you dig back in, you find out that it's limited to a certain number of tasks. Again, not necessarily bad, but something that you need to know, right? You need to know that and be able to help the plan sponsor with it. So, benchmarking, trying to figure this out. I had an advisor ask me about benchmarking. It's not easy to benchmark at this point because, again, everything is all over the map. But again, that's the opportunity for you as the advisor to come in and make sense of this, right? If it was all nice and tidy and tied together, well, then it wouldn't be a big deal, right? The opportunity wouldn't be as big. So the types of questions, you want to figure out what exactly are the services that are being provided and be able to line them up so you understand what's being provided, what's not. What is the fiduciary responsibility being accepted? Are they named in the document or not? Are they signing the 5500 or not? Do they have hiring and firing responsibilities? Those are important things for you to be able to know. You're going to want to look at, financial considerations. You want to look at what their insurances are, what their deductibles are. There's all sorts of types of things, but you can put together a pretty comprehensive due diligence for 316 services. And I think that would be important for the employer to see. Now, I get a question, pretty regularly from advisors, what's a good prospect? And typically, because we think about everything in the context of assets, like, what asset size is a good prospect? You know what? It really doesn't have a lot to do with the plan assets, quite frankly. It has to do more with what's going on at the plan level. And these are just a couple things to think about. I mean, anybody who gets outsourcing and understands the moving stuff off their plate work, they're a candidate for it. But there are other things that you might want to look at. So, is there activity inside the plan? There are people coming and going. People coming and going creates activity for the 401k plan. Does the employer actually care that it's done right? Look, we've all had meetings with employers that they don't care. Probably not a great candidate, right? Maybe there's liability removal that's necessary there. Maybe that's a different angle, but by and large, if they don't care about it, well, okay. The last two I think are important. Understands that their employees are involved in the minutia of ERISA and that there's some liability associated with it. They don't want them doing it. They want them doing other things, right? And idea that not just having someone do the work, but having someone take responsibility for the work, that would be important. So I think some combination of these types of things give you an idea of what's a good prospect for 316 outsourcing. Now, I think it's fairly simple, and this came about in a discussion again that I'd had with the advisor. How do you open up this discussion about outsourcing, especially on the plan administrator end of it? And really, it's pretty simple. It's just to say, look, we're in this space. We meet with employers all the time. We see how messed up plans can get. We see it regularly, right? Because ERISA is not easy. There's all sorts of things that can trip you up. And you put your name on this 90-plus page document. It means you got to do stuff, right? And you can give all examples and stories from your own travels of plans that have messed up for whatever reason. And then you just bring it back to say, look, if we could take your name off that document, reduce your work and the work for your employees, and also reduce your liability, is that something you'd be interested in learning more about? I think it's that simple. That is exactly what the advisor I talked to is doing. Nothing more complicated than that. And then once you get into that discussion, it can lead you anywhere. Yeah, some plans, they end up not outsourcing, but you've differentiated yourself and you've increased your opportunity of doing business with that employer. So that's the way to get in. It's been proven, it's been shown. Advisors doing it and has a lot of success with it. And I think it's something, we don't have to overcomplicate this, right? We don't have to make it more complicated than it already is. Okay. One last slide. I want to at least give you a little bit of background about PENTalk because I think it's important and to position us as in our expertise in this. So in 1943, the Federal Home Loan Bank system decided that they wanted to have a retirement plan for their members. And rather than set up 20 different ones, they said, why don't we put it all into one? Let's have one plan. And that's what they did. And PENTalk was established to provide all the services for that. So we've been a common law fiduciary since 1943. So we've been a fiduciary well before ERISA. We've been basically a 316 plan administrator before there was a 316 plan administrator. So we have, I would argue that we're probably the longest serving fiduciary, retirement plan fiduciary in the United States. I haven't seen anything that would tell me anything different. So we have a ton of knowledge, a ton of expertise in this, and we have incredible people with incredible backgrounds. So this is an area that we can really help you. We have over 1,000 clients already that we're the name plan administrator on their plan. So this is an area of expertise for us, and we would love to share that with you and love to help you to become that expert. Okay, so looks like it's about 30 minutes. That's about the time that I wanted to spend on this. If you want to get a hold of Beth sooner than waiting for her email to you tomorrow, there's her email address, beth.parker@pentegra.com. I really appreciate everyone sitting in. We're going to do a follow-up to this. We're going to talk about how you take this idea of outsourcing in a single employer plan and take it to the next level by creating more efficiencies, more economies of scale by doing it in a multiple employer plan environment. So be on the lookout. That'll be a follow-up. Truly, it's the most cost-effective way for an employer to do the least amount of work, and that's in a multiple employer plan. So, and it's based on this idea of outsourcing. So, thank you very much for being on, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.